Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 103, and we're going to cover 2 Samuel chapter 6 through 8. Last time we left off, we saw how David was growing as the king. And the question we should get every time we see a righteous man like this, the question we should raise in our mind is, hey, is this our guy? You got to put yourself in the shoes of the people at that time. Is this the seed? Is this the promised one who will save us from our sin? And then when you start to see the flaws and the sins of that man, you should say, man, it's not him. Or either it's not him and we look no further through his lineage, or it's not him, but he winnows, he furthers the seed alone. And that's the case with David. And if you talk to any rabbi today, what they look for in the Messiah, obviously we trust in Christ as the Messiah, but there are three things they look for in the Messiah. They say he'll unify all of Israel, he'll rebuild a temple, and he'll bring true peace to a nation militarily. And so you see these things with David, right? He's going to buy the threshing floor to build a temple. His son will actually build it. He brings Israel together militarily. He just keeps growing in strength, and he unites all of Israel. And so that's what our Messiah is going to do. And we saw, remember our 4 F's? We saw formulation. David gets his palace. He gets his place in a certain city. Where's that? Zion, that's Jerusalem. And obviously this wasn't the first time Jerusalem was mentioned. We saw the king of Salem, Melchizedek. Where did David send Goliath's head when he killed him? Remember, he sent it to Jerusalem. And that's just interesting. It was just so random. He kills Goliath and chops off his head and ships it to Jerusalem. And you just see that in the text, like the Lord filling him with the Spirit and showing him good theology. Like, you're headed to Jerusalem because you're a king, and that's going to be your headquarters. And also, think about this. Where does Abram nearly sacrifice Isaac? At Mount Moriah. Where's Mount Moriah? Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the city of kings. And where does Jesus go to die? Guess that he goes to Jerusalem. So this is an important city to remember. And we saw that in 2 Samuel 5. And David takes Jerusalem. He tells somebody to go and take Jerusalem. And this is in 2 Samuel 5. Joab climbs up a water duct. And remarkably, this place is still in Israel to this day. It's called Hezekiah's Tunnel. You can go to Israel and see this place in 2 Samuel 5. In fact, there's a scholar at our church who's working on his PhD, and he's really good at geography. He's been to Israel several times, and he has pictures of pretty much every in biblical history. And his name is Dan Dennison, and I would love for him to put a presentation together of the land of the Bible, the geography of the Bible, so it'll take us on a journey as we see all of these locations. We can put the actual geography with them that's existing to this day. That type of stuff just brings the Bible alive. Like, I've heard of reports of people coming back from Israel and saying crazy statements like this: man, I just got saved. They were already saved. When you're reading a book, it's just so hard to try to make these things realistic. We train our minds that they are, but when you actually set your foot on the land, it's just a different experience. And I would love to go one day. Maybe if our Devo with Uncle Theo grew more and more as we gain mastery of the scriptures, we could save up to take a trip to Israel one day. But let's start small. Let's go to the Creation Museum or the Ark first, and then we could build up from there. So you can't have a king without Jerusalem, and Jerusalem can never be fulfilled without a king. And so we move into chapter 6, and this is the sin of Uzzah with the ark. We know this story a lot, but let's cover it today. I'm going to read verse 1. It says, "Now David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name, the very name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned above the cherubim." So when we get down closer to chapter 6, they're bringing the ark. And so David is trying to be obedient. He's a king. Remember, he kills Goliath with stones. That's so amazing to me. What do you do with a blasphemer? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? I come in the name of the Lord. You stone a blasphemer. David kills Goliath. He sends his head to Jerusalem. He's taking over. He's uniting Israel. He's creating the city of Jerusalem, the headquarters. And now he's trying to get the ark back. But look at what happens. He's about to learn a lesson that we've been talking about over and over. So David wants to get the ark back fast. So he puts it on the wagon and somebody touches it by the name of Uzzah. He touches it and he dies. This is in verse 6. It says, he reached out to the ark of God and took a hold of it, for the oxen nearly upset it, and the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and the Lord struck him down there for his irreverence. And so you see all of this going on. You're like, man, David's intentions are good. Uzzah's intentions are good. He didn't want the ark of God to fall on the ground. And a famous theologian said this one time, and it just always sticks with me. And I know if you've heard this quote, it sticks with you too. But when I say it, it's going to stick with you forever. He makes this statement. He says that Uzzah should have never touched the ark because he was a sinner. God would have much rather his ark fall on the ground because the ground was more holy than sinful man. And I'm like, wow, talk about bars right there. But think about what's happening. What's the first thing that's going on wrong? Remember when we studied Exodus, the ark was to have poles on it, right? It had poles on it for a reason. You're to carry the thing. You can't put it on the cart just to transfer it faster. God raised up the Levitical priesthood, the Levites, Kohath, Gershon, and Merari for a reason. But David wanted to get the ark to the city faster. And this is just like Israel during the time of Eli, putting the ark on the battlefield, treating it like a good luck charm. I know you, and here's our practical application. Like a lot of times I know you love the Lord. I know you want to get to obedience fast. And a lot of times you want to do God's will your way, but it doesn't work like that. You must do God's will his way. If he says carry the poles by hand, even though it's slower, you carry the poles by hand. This causes a man to be killed. This causes David to disobey. And God tells David, don't get it twisted. You are the king. But remember, you're lowercase k king. I'm uppercase, capital K king. And so this was a warning shot at David to humble him. But David is afraid of the Lord. He leaves the ark in the city. And it's funny, he leaves it there for 3 months and the person's whole household is blessed. And it reports it back to David and David goes and get it. And he's wearing a linen ephod and he's dancing in the city. And this is where McCalley kind of tries to rebuke him and says, you're making a mockery of yourself. You're shaming yourself and you're uncovering yourself, dancing half naked. But David responds back to her. This is how the chapter ends. It says, so David said to McCalley, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore, I will celebrate before the Lord. I will be more lightly esteemed than this and will be humble in my own eyes. But with the maids of whom you have spoken, with them I will be distinguished. Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. And so some theologians make the point of, why does the chapter end like that? Does David cease to have a marital relationship with her on why she doesn't have kids? Or is this a continued judgment on the house of Saul, giving her a barren womb? But we move to our famous chapter 7. So remember, guys, you cannot forget these chapters. Don't forget the Noahic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and now we've arrived to the Davidic covenant. So the chapter starts off in verse 7. It says, and the Lord had given him rest on every side. You see our theme, follow it. We're going back to Eden where God rested. He wanted rest. And so it looks like creation is getting back to rest. He had rest on every side. And the king said to Nathan the prophet, he wants to build God a house. And another word for this is a temple. But look at what God does. God says, you won't build me a house, but guess what? I'll build you a house. I'll make you a dynasty. This moves us into the Davidic covenant. So let's grab some of this here. We need to understand how the Davidic covenant works. Look at verse 9. He says, make for you a great name. Where have we heard this before? We heard this with Abraham. They wanted to make a great name at Babel, but they couldn't. And God says, they won't make a great name. I'll confuse their languages. But Abraham, guess what I'm going to do with you? I'm going to make you a great name. And through you, all the nations will be blessed. Through you, the seed will come. And David is a descendant of Abraham through Judah. And guess what else he says? It says, will plant them in the land. Where? The land of promise, also found in Exodus. The Davidic covenant is the fulfillment of Exodus. Even remember back when David at one point made a statue and a judgment when he said the people who stayed with the baggage and the people who go to war, it says that at that point he made a statue and a judgment. And you rarely see that in scripture. You see that with prophets. And the only other person that had really ever done that was Moses. And so you see him fulfilling the Mosaic covenant. It says judgments over the people. And so why did God appoint judges? To uphold his law. Why were they cursed before? Because disobedience leads to curses and obedience leads to what? Blessings. So the Mosaic covenant is tied to this as well. What's left? The Noahic covenant, right? Look at verse 11. Even from the day I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and I will give you what? Rest. There it is, the Noahic covenant. I'm telling you, you're going to believe me before long that one of the major themes of the Bible is rest, getting back to Sabbath. I'll repeat it over and over again so you won't believe that I'm just making it up as I go. But this is really good. So here's the conclusion. All of the covenants are wrapped up in the Davidic covenant. So if you control the Davidic covenant, you can regulate every single promise that God has. Let me say it a stronger way. If you can control the Davidic covenant, you can control the world. And it says in verse 12, when your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendants after you who will come forth from you and will establish his kingdom. So even when he's dead, somebody will flow from him. Genesis 3:15. That's our word, descendant. That's the same word as seed. That's what we've been chasing. So the Genesis 3:15 promise is here in the Davidic covenant. And we see in verse 13, he says, he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Remember, build a house. That's Bethel, house of God, which is a temple. And Solomon is the one who does this. But the Messiah does this also. Ezekiel 40 through 48 talks about this. And look at how it ends. This is beautiful. Verse 14, I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the sons of men. What does that sound like? That's Isaiah 53. He will treat him as if he committed iniquity, though he did not, because what does Isaiah 53 say? He was stricken by God, and he was wounded for our transgressions, and by his stripes we are healed. Now, you see how this works? You need to make sure you understand how every covenant revolves around the Davidic covenant. The more you understand this covenant, the higher and the more powerful you understand Christ to be. Because when he comes and fulfills the Davidic covenant, that should prove to you that Christ has the power. He's the king, the true king. He controls all the other covenants. Therefore, he has the power to make a new covenant. But you got to build this theology off 2 Samuel 7. He's just not an everyday kind of guy. He is the pinnacle and the focal point of all of history. And this chapter is beautiful. It gets us there. Don't forget 2 Samuel 7. And so guess what David does? He hears all of these beautiful promises from God. And just like any person would do, the next chapter, he tests it out. He takes it for a test drive. And he's just walking through. You remember through the book of Joshua where they were just killing everybody. They had no casualties coming through the second generation. It's similar type of language. He just strikes people and they die. Let's look at that in chapter 8, verse 1. David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And David took control of the chief city from the hands of the Philistines. And they had never been defeated. Remember when we were studying with Saul? They just kept popping up everywhere like a jack in the box. Saul will be chasing David, almost hot on them, pursuing them. Then he'll get a report. Hey, the Philistines are taking over the land, and he'll have to run and leave. And even remember with Samson, the Philistines were always a thorn in the flesh. Look at what David does. He just crushes them out. They're done. Then he defeats Moab and measured them with a line. And the Moabites became servants of David. Look at verse 3. David defeated Hadadezer, and he went to restore his rule at this is key, river. Guess what river that is? That's the river Euphrates. That's a lot of territory. He's taken all the land. He's going all across Mesopotamia, and he's taken the entire region. And you remember the promise? Where did God say that your territory would extend to? To the river Euphrates. He's taking nations out left and right, and all these nations hear about it and say, look, we want to join Israel. We don't want no problems. David has it going on. We skipped over a beautiful prayer that he said at the end of chapter 7 for the sake of time, but I encourage you to read that. It's just beautiful theology in his prayer, just like Hannah, that he has clear understanding of who God is and for his sovereignty. But David is our guy, and we're going to even see his kindness to Mephibosheth, and we're going to see him continuing to defeat lands. But sadly, it all comes to an end, right? Remember our other F, failure. We're very close to chapter 10 and 11, the Bathsheba incident, and it's going to start to go downhill from there. So stay tuned as we continue to cover this exciting book. I hope you're growing with me and learning much. Let's continue to move along in faithfulness together. You guys have a good day.